Welcome everyone. My name is Derek Delaquadri and I am the president of Vision Infosoft. Today we are completing our three-part series, our webinar series here of taking off or completing a bid for a project that's in Alabama. That's a 43,400 square foot municipal building. In the first part, we went over kind of the logistics of putting the bid together, what considerations we need to make, and in the second part, we covered some key takeoff sections and helped everyone get a good understanding of the steps needed to do the takeoff on the plan and consider assemblies in the electrical bid manager database. And we answered a bunch of questions. You guys had a bunch of questions last week. And today we're going to take you through the final bid preparation steps. Brian Hoffelder will be guiding us through that with Ron Soltis. And Brian is Vision's estimating and training expert, and Ron has been a longtime customer of Vision Infosoft, and we consider him, and I think everyone else would, an electrical industry expert, and has a lot of good insight to share. So let's turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Derek. Again, I want to thank Ron for sitting in on the webinar here today. He's got some really invaluable experience in the industry, both as a electrical contractor. He ran a medium to large size company, and then over the last 20 years or so, he ran an estimating service with about 20 employees. So he's seen every size and type of job that you could imagine. Worked on them a lot himself, and worked and supervised the takeoffs and worked with the customers on those. I guess the other thing I want to stress is that everything I present in these webinars, this one maybe even more so than others, is based on input I've gotten from customers over the years. So, especially when I'm working with somebody that's got a lot of experience, I take that information, and then store it away and use it down the road. We're going to be covering 4 topics here today, with the final preparation of the bid, which typically starts with the job extension and reviewing that. And then we're going to go to the job total screen, where you add things like your quotes, your overhead and profit, and then we'll finish with some examples of some proposals or scope letters that you can actually generate from within the program. So let's get rolling here. Let me switch over to EBM. Okay, so in EBM, this is probably the most important report that you generate on a bid, the job extension here under reports. And this is where we have to make a couple of really important decisions about what price level to use and what labor column to use. The default in EBM is column 2. Now, again, this is a very subjective thing. You as the estimator have to make the call. Column 1 is a real low number. Column 3 is a much higher number. It's about double column 1. Column 2 is a little bit somewhere in the middle. So that's what I typically use for most new commercial work. Wouldn't use it for a change order, wouldn't use it for an industrial job, wouldn't use it for things that are getting into the more, like a heavy demolition and remodel, that kind of thing. But for typical new commercial work, that's a good place to start. You also have this option for a labor factor. You can put a percentage in here. It can be a positive or negative number. So that's another way to adjust your labor on the overall global basis. The price column over here to the left, this target price comes from Epic. So it's based on a national average that contractors are paying for materials. So it's typically got a little cushion. Keep in mind on the larger jobs that your cushion is probably a little bit greater, because when you go to buy out a large job, you're going to get better pricing typically. There's a place for a price factor here. One of the jobs we're going to be talking about today was scheduled to go over a 3-year period. So now we have to start playing a crystal ball there and trying to figure out, or at least put some thought into what might happen to prices over the next time period where this job is going to be bought out. Now, you can typically get wholesalers to lock in prices for a period of time. I doubt they're going to do 3 years, but they might give you some lock in on prices there if you commit to buying a certain amount of material. So those are 2 really big factors here in extending and pricing and getting the price and labor values for the job. I'm just going to hit extension spreadsheet down here at the bottom. So this is a children's home project that I worked on with another company in New York, actually. It's a pretty good sized job. I think it came out to be in the $4 million plus range. So one of the things we're looking for here on the job extensions, this is where we can make our adjustments in prices and labor units. Now, especially on a big job, this is a long report. And it's going to go several pages. You can see if I scroll down here, there's a lot of stuff on this job. If I go down all the way to the bottom, I will see the total material and the total labor. So there's about $1 million worth of material, and that does not include any quotes, and about almost 17,000 hours of labor. So again, the challenge here, I'm looking for the big ticket items. I'm also looking for anything that just looks out of whack. Maybe I made a mistake and I, instead of putting in, 500 feet of 1-inch conduit for some home runs and I accidentally typed 5,000 feet, those kind of things I'm looking for here. Now there's a report that really helps with that. It's this report on the left called the item cost report. And you can tell it to sort by price or labor. It might take just a little bit to generate this because this job is pretty large. But it's basically going to bring up the largest dollar items to the top of the report. And again, that's going to help me with two things. It's going to tell me the things that I really want to concentrate on, maybe go out and get some pricing on those key items. Yeah, sometimes the webinar program sucks up a little bit of the computer power. When I ran this before the webinar, it was fairly quick. There it is. So you can see here, the first item is some large wire. There's $142,000 worth of number 600 wire on this job. We also used, on this job, we used multi-conductor. This one's 12/7 aluminum MC cable. We used that for a lot of the home runs. So this price here, I remember we got from a local supplier. I think we probably also got quotes on the first 4 or 5 items, which are primarily wire. So these are the key items. These are the critical items that are probably going to make or break the job. Now you can run the same thing for labor. And again, I'm running this report for two things. I'm looking for things that jump out because there was a mistake. I don't think that applies here, but also I'm looking for the key items that could make or break the job that I want to maybe verify or get some local pricing from some of my suppliers on. Now, if you're going to change prices and labor again, you have to go back to job extension. And you just hit extension spreadsheet. And you can put the prices in on this report. Now, again, this report does not include any quoted items. I typically want to get a hard copy of this. If I go to preview report, I want to print this out and I want to save it as a PDF file. I want both. I want a hard copy and I want an electronic copy. I think that's my 2 cents on the job extension. I don't want to underplay. This is the place that, that really saves you time. And the time savings on a large job like this is really a huge factor because it's going to crank out the numbers on a $2 million job just about as quick, just as quick as it would on a $20,000 job. Ron, any comments or questions on the job extension process, things that you look for?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, again, big ticket items, you definitely want to check prices on. You also want to look for zeros. Zeros are not good. There's a lot of, you could put something in there, maybe you needed $1 or you needed, $50 and you mistyped a number and you get a lot of zero. Those are the two, your high sides and your low sides. I also like to check for quantities. For instance, like a floor box. You can take a floor box off. Maybe, you need 10 of them and you typed 1 and took it off and didn't notice and moved on. So, your out of ordinary items that sometimes you got to build them and you're trying to build one item because it takes several products to make that one item up. And you may type in everything at 1 and you needed 10 of everything. So you can find yourself with a $2,000 or $3,000 floor box and you don't have the $30,000 or $40,000 that you need for that. So it's a very a good place to kind of run through that. And with the taking these extensions and sorting them by those columns, it makes it real easy for you to try to spot those items. Wire pricing, conduit pricing, and all that stuff can be done at that extension level, and really detail your estimate on your material costs from your supplier. That's that's where I do this. Yeah.
And like Ron was just saying, when you really want to try to look at those items that you've added to the bid, the temporary items, and if you look at this report, every item that has a T on it, that's a temporary item. Quite honestly, it's more likely that you made a mistake in putting an item, like Ron said, you meant to put in 1 box and it was supposed to be 10, or vice versa. If you look at these temporary items, those are all items that were added by the user just for the job. So you want to scrutinize those maybe a little more carefully. All right, let's move on.
Even like yeah. All right.
Go ahead.
Even the one thing I did want to say, even like your wire quantities, especially with your larger pipe, you got 100 feet of pipe, you got 4 600s in it. You want to make sure that you got, 450 or 500 feet of wire sitting there for that.
Right.
And making sure that you didn't quantify that wrong, because it's very easy to misalign in the takeoff or to set a quantity, and then you're not getting the appropriate amount. So definitely that's what this is for here. You really want to go through this with a little bit of a fine-tooth comb and quantify things a little bit, just to make sure your takeoff is matching what your intent was.
Okay, so maybe we'll take a quick look for questions, Derek. I see there's at least one person who's got a raised hand. I'm going to go to my control panel and see if we want to take questions just on the job extension process.
I just got a nice response from one of our customers that said, I just wanted to thank you guys for doing this webinar. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Derek and Ron. We're a very, very small company, and these webinars have helped us. Thank you.
I'll try Paul Scipione. Paul, you there?
Hey, Brian.
I got you. Yep. Go ahead and ask your question. You're
doing?
Live.
Hi, Derek. How you doing?
Good.
So when you had talked about labor adjustments on the previous page, like for can you touch on that a little bit more?
So, a lot of things come into this, it's a lot, it's mostly going to be based on your experience or anybody else that can give you input on experience with that type of job. I didn't feel like this job needed an adjustment. It doesn't have, it only had a couple floors. One of the jobs I'm going to show you a little bit later has 8 floors. So we put a multi-floor adjustment in there. But we're really looking for overall difficulty factors. The job we took off in the other 2 webinars was a pretty straightforward commercial job. Had some interesting, not typical things with grounding and a couple other areas of the job, but the electrical portion of it, for the most part, was fairly straightforward. So again, it's very subjective. I can't give you any absolute guidelines. To some extent, the larger the job, the more you're going to get some benefits for productivity. But that also has, when the jobs get really large, a lot of that goes away too. There's probably a sweet spot in there somewhere for most companies where, certain size jobs, they get their best productivity. Nobody gets good productivity on really small jobs. And then on the really big jobs, you got to look at all the factors that come into play. It could be the size of the building. You just flip over to a job here real quickly. We're going to go to the totals part of the. Does that answer your question? I know it wasn't a good answer, Paul, but.
Can you still hear me?
I can.
So basically, in that column back there for the labor, where you just are, say you're doing a 25-story high-rise, right? That's where you would do your labor factor adjustment there?
You could do it here or in the job totals.
Okay.
Okay. I probably would do it there in the job totals. But again, it's only because in the job totals I could identify it. I could put a line item in there that says added for multi-stories. In here, it's just a global thing. I don't know why I did it other than just I did it. So. And
then the other one, the price factor, that's just for material.
Right. And again, that's where you might try to factor in price increases. If you're anticipating that there's going to be some inflation, I guess even possibly deflation, or again, you're you want to factor in a little bit of the buyout issue. You know, the prices typically drop on the larger jobs when you commit to certain dollar amounts and quantities.
Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Let me try to handle a couple of the quick questions before we get too far along. I see Arnold Heck, did you want to ask a question?
Yes. At what point did you start adding a labor factor for a high-rise building?
They say typically anything above 3 to 5 stories. And hey, Ron, I want to ask your input on this. Where do you start adding for multi-floors, and how much do you add?
Yeah, we typically it's a third story is the last level of normal labor.
Yep,
Once you go past that, you could be looking at 3 to 5% floor.
Yep.
You know, and again, trying to figure, you know, you got to kind of take your job and divide it out by floor to see where that labor is going to be, and then start adding your labor against that. And because you got a lot of lost time going up and down to get there, material travel, manpower travel, and so you lose a lot of your day. A typical 10-story building, that 10th story, you know, you could lose an hour to an hour and a half per man. And so depending on how long that takes, you really got to start looking at those scaling for that labor.
Those are very close to the numbers I've used and had people. You know, those are pretty typical numbers. That 3 to 5% above the third floor, and then it starts really anything above the third floor.
Right, and it's not just floors either. I mean, it's parking. Let's assume you got to park a mile away from the job. Now you've got lost time from that position to the job site. So you really got to kind of take a look at your whole logistics on the project, and really look at, you know, your manpower moving to, from, up, down, material travel, even you know, different labor rates or different, I should say, different laborers. So not just the electricians, but you know, the guys moving the material. You can balance that a little bit by having a regular laborer do a few things rather than having the technicians doing stuff. So
I'm going to switch over here. To a larger job that does have multi-floors.
Brian.
This was a job we did for, yes, sir.
I muted Arnold because we were getting feedback from him, but feel free to unmute him to let him have another round of feedback. But go ahead. Continue.
Okay. So this job was actually a very simple job. It was the fire alarm backbone for the new Los Angeles Rams Stadium that's currently under construction. So it was simple from the point of view that all we had to take off was conduit and boxes. And I believe there was just 2 conduit sizes on the job, 3/4 inch and something larger. And there was just a couple different types of boxes. But it was an 8-story, it's an 8-story building. So you've got, I think it was 150 or so just pages for the fire alarm system. So it was a very, you know, time-consuming takeoff, even though it was relatively simple. So you'll see on this job here, the non-productive. So this ended up being roughly a $12 million job, and that did not even include the fire alarm subcontract itself. That was just the electrical conduit and box portion of the job. I'm going to go right to job totals here. Now, this is about as extreme as I've ever seen the non-productive aspect of the job, but we had to factor in a lot of things here. This job site is huge. I don't know how many acres it was, but it's a big job site. The material handling was off-site, so we put a pretty big number in here just for the material handling. Right there. The material handling, the storage of the material was off-site. So anytime you wanted material, you had to, you know, it was like 3 miles away. So that's obviously a big factor in it. And here's the multi-floor labor we put into it. So we had a $750,000 just in additional labor for the multiple floors. On this size job, obviously, you're going to have lots of supervision. So we had a big allowance for the general foreman. We had a big allowance for the project manager. We already saw the material handling, but things like safety meetings, you don't necessarily see on jobs, smaller jobs, but this job had safety meetings every week. I think we figured over an hour a day just for getting onto the job site, clearing security, getting to the work area, and then additional time and leaving the job. So you can see that the non-productive portion of this job was almost as much as the productive portion. And again, this labor number represents our best guess as to what the average would be for a 3-year period starting from the start of the job to the end of the job. This was for a union company, so we had at least the benefit of knowing what the union rates were for the first part of the job. But during that 3-year period, there was going to be a change in the rates, and obviously we don't know what's going to happen. We didn't know at that time what was going to happen with that. So this was a blended rate based on our best guess. I think we figured a 5 or 10% increase in the wages over that period. So this job had gotten up to $12 million without even a subcontract included here. That was just pipe and boxes. Let me go back just real quickly to one other job here. I guess now wait till we talk about overhead and profit. There's a thing I want to talk about with overhead and profit.
You want to give Arnold another?
Yeah, go ahead, Ron. Any questions or thoughts here on the?
Well, Arnold asked the question. I muted him, so he might have a feedback to provide.
Okay, let me go back to Arnold.
That's done.
Go ahead and ask your question, Arnold.
Okay, what do you do about when there's no place on the job to store a gang box and the men have to travel back and forth from the shop every day to the job?
That you've got to put an allowance in for that. Actually, on that job we looked at first, the children's center. Let me tell you something about that real quick. I'm going to flip back there. Actually, I'm going to bring up another job. This job was for the same contractor in New York, and their situation is basically the way they look at the jobs is that they figure that on a typical day, they're going to have to pay the electrician an hour to get to the job and an hour to get back to the shop, because typically most of them come into the job at the beginning of the day, pick up their truck or their van, pick up their materials, and go to the job site. And that's all time you have to pay them for. So in the final bid, we allowed 2 hours a day for each person. So that's the same thing as material handling, just probably a little more extreme. You can look at the length of the job and figure out how many hours you're going to have to add if it's off-site material handling. On that stadium job, we had a huge allowance in for that because it was not only off-site, but it was 3 miles off-site. So those are the kind of things that really you have to start thinking about with these larger jobs. I'll wait for this to come up again.
I muted him again because of the feedback. So
okay. This is a different job for the same contractor, but I did the whole thing from beginning to end. So you see we had 8,000 hours here. I don't know what happened to the rate. I'll pull something up here. That's not the one I was expecting. Let me hold. Sorry about that. I'm going to pull up a different job here. I want to spend just a couple more minutes on this total screen on the final, coming up with the final number. Then I want to spend leave a few minutes to talk about your proposal or your scope letter that you need to prepare, especially on the larger jobs. So this particular job, this Sunshine Children's Home, the owner was providing the lighting. So one of the things that comes into play there, which is very important, is that we're not getting any markup on the lighting. And I don't think you should just give that away. What we figured it in was under direct job expenses. We put in an engineering allowance. We figured roughly the fixture package. We even had a quote on what the fixture quote would have been. I think it would have been about $200,000 on this job. So we figured the normal markup on that, and then put that in as a direct job expense, so we didn't totally ignore that part of the job. That's one thing you might want to look about when you get a job where the owner provides lighting and or the gear, but it probably happens more with lighting, is if you're not getting your overhead and profit on that, then you want to put some money in to cover that, because you're still going to have to handle it. You're not getting the markup you would normally get if you had a quote on the job. One more thing I want to just touch on. Let's talk about overhead for a minute. You know, the basic way overhead is approached is by a percentage. Most people use this option down here to do a percentage on the entire job. Again, whether it's 8%, 15%, probably typically on the larger jobs, the markup percentage is going to be a little lower than it would be on a small job because of the size of the job. You know, what you don't want to do is do a $10,000 job, 10 $10,000 jobs for the same price you would a $100,000 jobs, or you don't want to do 10 $100,000 jobs for the same price you would do a million, or same markup percentage you would do $1 million job. You know, the little jobs have proportionally more overhead and headaches associated with them. So that's part of the reason that the margins start to go down on the bigger jobs. And the other thing that I've seen here as far as how to calculate, so the overhead is supposed to cover the cost of doing the business. Now, sometimes that's not a real black or white thing, but overhead should cover your salaried employees. It should cover all your utilities, any truck payments, leases, payments on the trucks, loans, or however you finance those. It should include your lease or rent on your building, all of the fixed expenses that are going to basically keep recurring month after month, to some extent, regardless of how much work you have going in the field. That's what overhead is. So that's why on these jobs we separated the foreman, the project manager, that kind of thing, because that's not really an overhead item. Some people would include it in their overhead, and again, that's not wrong. It's just not the way I typically look at it. One of the approaches I've seen to overhead, which I think is pretty interesting, is to put the overhead on just the labor and do it by the hour. So what those contractors do is they figure their total overhead for the month. Let's say it's $170,000. And then they divide that into the number of hours for a typical month of labor they have in the field. So let's say they've got 20 guys, and you can figure 4 times 40. Actually, it should be 4 times 4.25, 4.25 weeks in a month on average. Times 40 hours a month. Oh, geez, come on. I'll get it. Times 40 hours a month equals 170 hours per electrician per month. So if you take the 100 and then if you multiply that by the number of employees, let's say it's 20, that means you've got 3,400 hours on average a month that you're having to pay your electricians for. So if we take the 170,000 and divide it, oops, one more time, sorry, 170,000, divide it by the 3,400 hours. That means, what was that number? Hold on a second. I'm sorry. this number was not the number I meant to give you an example with. Let's say the overhead expense for this company is $68,000. These are kind of real numbers that I worked with a company on. So you divide that by the 3,400 hours. That's $20 an hour that you need to charge just to cover the overhead. So you can put that in here on the per labor hour instead of just marking the job up. And one of the companies that I worked with this on, they monitor that number every month. At the end of the month, they say, how many hours did we have in the field? What was our overhead for the month? And they look at that number every month. And theirs was slightly under that number, but they watch it really closely. If that number goes up or down, then they have to make adjustments to the way they mark up the job. So what that does is that recovers just the cost of running the business. And then we can look at the profit separately from that. So in this case, it would have been a $661,000 for overhead. Ron, do you have any thoughts on overhead and profit before we move on to the proposals?
No, Brian, I think you're doing it exactly like how I would do it.
Okay.
And again, calculating your overhead. I mean, you got this. If you got a secretary, you got, an estimator, you got the owner, you got operational costs, buildings, power, all your utilities, whatever it takes to operate. And you add all that stuff up on an annual basis, and then you can divide that out and get down to hourly factors or percentage factors based on the job. And of course, you can also spread this out too. It's not just this job unless this is the only job you're going to take for that year.
Right.
So if you have several jobs, that you got to start looking at how many jobs, because your competition is going to do that as well. They're going to look out at several jobs that they're doing for that overhead to make sure that they got that covered, and you're making your appropriate profits.
One of the questions I've had many times over the years is can you include the cost of the estimator or the estimate in the bid? No, that's part of your overhead. The project manager, that's a little bit more of a gray area, but typically if the project manager is going to be spending time on a specific job, not with the tools, he's part of the overhead. So you either got to account for it in the overhead, or you got to account for it as a direct job expense. I would look as a project manager as a direct job expense, but somewhere you got to cover that cost.
Yeah. Yeah, the supervisor would be an overhead. If you got a general supervisor, he's overhead. And an estimator is going to be in your overhead. So those factors have got to be running into this figure here. You don't want to skew a hourly rate or a job by expense trying to capture those things, because you're going to set yourself up for a bid that's going to be too high. So you got to be conscious about those expenses and where you're putting them, and trying to spread that out through different jobs so you don't overcost yourself.
So I want to spend just a couple minutes on the proposal scope letter. I think, especially with a large job, sending out a scope letter prior to the bid date and time is really important. You don't want to send your final proposal without, or you want to send a proposal at the hour before the bid time and expect that the people that are going to review it are going to have time to take it seriously. I think it's important to send out, you can call it a proposal, you can call it a scope letter. I think I've got a couple in here. Let's look at this one first. So this scope letter is not going to have your price on it. It's just going to have a detailed breakdown of all the things that are accounted for in the job. So it's going to have things like all the drawings. I would include every sheet that you're bidding, sheet E1 through, list them all, E101, E102, E201, E202, the whole set, and the dates. Actually, I've got a little better one here. I'll pull up one that's a little more detailed. Let's do the
This, Brian, if I could just step in, this is kind of an important part, because if you go per plans and spec, guess what? If there's a bunch of lighting on a plumbing drawing, they're going to make you install it, and at your cost, because it's there. It's in the drawings, and you sign per plans and specs. So it's real important to discern what plans, what dates. This way, if they come out with a new set, there's been changes on it, and everybody's gone through that, that you could identify what drawing date that you had, and if they didn't change the date on the new set, then you can discern those sets from what was changed and make a change order. You don't want to skip out on that, because that could be, $100 to $1 million, and you just don't even know.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical part, to have the actual dates, the pages and the dates. Dates are really important, because again, on a big job, you can almost bet that there are going to be changes to the job between the time you bid the job and the time the job actually starts. So you need to list things like the addendums. On a large job, again, if there's a separate section of the specs for the electrical, you want to list that. Make sure they know what section of the specs you're covering. Addendums are really important. List any addendums on the job we talked about in the first 2 webinars. There were 6 addendums. So I would list those and the dates. Engineer and architect probably aren't as critical, some things, but again, just for the formality of it, it doesn't hurt to list them. And I would also list the job site address. But these first 3 are really the critical ones that you want to have on your scope letter. And then the other thing we want to look at is the exclusions and the other conditions that apply here. This is just kind of a checklist to start with. You would edit this for each job if you're not including utility charges, which is typical. Again, you would list that as an exclusion. If you're not including temporary power and lighting, you want to list that as an exclusion. Now, the problem with exclusions is if you get too carried away and you exclude stuff that you're supposed to include per the instructions in the drawings, then they're probably not going to take your bid real seriously. So on anything that's really critical, you should either put an allowance in for it, but not necessarily exclude it. You don't want to put the general contractor you're bidding to in a bad position because you excluded something that you should have either included in your bid or at least give them an allowance for. But this is kind of a good checklist to start with, things that you might be able to typically exclude. And your list may look a little different than somebody else's. This is a form letter that's built into the system. And again, you notice there's no price on this form, on this letter. Now, if you put, let's go back to another job that's got a little more complete information.
I have a question if you're going to switch jobs.
Go ahead.
Kenneth asks, where is the engineering makeup again?
Where's the engineering makeup?
Markup?
Not sure I understand. Markup. Okay, so what my example was, we put some money into as a direct job expense to account for the markup. We called it engineering. It was just a way of, I don't want to say hiding it, but not specifically in case we had to share these reports with anybody. We didn't want to necessarily say, here's the markup we would have gotten if we had a fixture package in the job. We called it engineering rather than just not giving it any kind of a name. So that's what I was referring to in the example where we put in, I think it was $50,000 for engineering when it was really $50,000 of overhead and profit we might have made on the lighting part of the job.
Yep, Kenneth says thank you.
Now this is a smaller job, but I can show you a little bit a better example of a form letter here. There's 2 I want to show you. There's one called, what's the one you created, Derek? Oh, there it is right there. So here's a nice little clean format for a bid proposal. You can put your logo up here at the top, and then it's going to fill in things like the company you're bidding to, who you are, your company, work description. This can come from all this information is coming from the job. That's the nice part. So this is a nice little simple format for a small, maybe medium-sized job. I'm going to pull up that other format again that has the more extensive list of these form letters I'm pulling up here are built into EBM. They are totally transparent, totally compatible with Microsoft Word. So you can go either direction. If you want to take the master template and edit it in Microsoft Word and then bring it back to here, that's fine. Or once you're finished with doing your basic proposal or form letter here, you can open it up in Word and do more editing. The word processing tools here within EBM are pretty limited. They don't have lots of bells and whistles. But you can open this once you've finished it in Microsoft Word and do any kind of formatting and bells and whistles that you want. They're totally transparent. You can move them back and forth between the two programs. So again, you can see on this one the more detailed exclusions and conditions. And again, no price. Any comments, Ron, on the final proposals, that kind of thing? We already talked about the drawings and specs and all that. I guess that was one of the more important points.
Yeah, I think, for detail, this is where detail counts. If you're going to exclude things, you got to make sure. This way you can, if you get into a situation, you can refer back to your proposal and keep those costs isolated for negotiation or whatever needs to be done in order to make the contractor, to keep the contract moving forward. But it is a very important aspect of your project, and to get it right, so you're not including or excluding or something that could end up costing you money and or driving the job south.
And again, I think an important thing about larger jobs, you can expect much more of that negotiation aspect to take place. If it's a $2 million, $5 million electrical bid, it's not just going to be, here's your contract. You're going to have to sit down and go over some of these details and maybe give them some allowances for things that weren't in the bid and go over the details on the exclusions and drawings and all that. So that'll be something that will take place if you're either the apparent low bidder or one of the apparent low bidders. There will definitely be a negotiation phase where you work out the final details of the price and the terms of the contract.
Hey, Brian, I have a question here.
Go ahead.
Where are these letters in EBM? Must have missed it.
Okay, they're under two places. I always go to job totals, and down at the bottom you'll see form letters. Give it a second to come up here. Down here where it says select, down here at the bottom of the job total screen is form letters. And then you're going to get a window that lets you select the different templates that are built into the program. Not sure why it switched over to that screen, but
Just thinking.
may have crashed there. I don't know how I did that, but let's go back there real quick. Okay, so I'll open up a job. This one's not a big job, it's a $100,000 job. So okay, there's two places to get those form letters.
That one will be in our next version, 11.6 as well.
The first one I showed, I think it was one of the first ones. Okay, so under job totals, there's a button at the bottom of this little window that says form letters. And that will list all the different templates that are available. Scope letters, I've got a few of them in here. You can also get to this same option by going to reports and coming down here to form letters, gives you the same same window that opens up with the different templates. So this is a new one that we built for the next release, a little more modern look to it. So either form letters at the bottom of the job total screen or form letters under the drop down for reports. We'll give you those options. There's one even for change orders. There's a template for a change order. So there's some nice little reports that are built in there. The nice thing about it, again, you can totally modify those form letters. I don't want to get into a whole separate webinar on that, but just you can move things around in the form letter. You can add text, you can delete text, you can add fields for things that you want included from the program or the job. It's pretty versatile little part of the program. Any other questions or thoughts before we wrap up here?
Yes.
Derek, do you want to talk a minute about? Go ahead.
I do. Have a couple questions. When editing the form letter, does it save to the same folder?
You save it wherever you save it.
Right.
So when you finish making changes and you close it, it's going to ask if you want to save it. You can either, well, typically what you don't want to do unless you're changing the master template is you don't want to change, you don't want to override the master template. You want to save it under a different name in a different folder. But again, when you save that form letter, you can direct it anywhere you want. So typically on a job, like we talked about in the first webinar, you would probably have a folder for that job. And in that folder, you'd have the drawings, you'd probably have any correspondence, addendums, and the folder for maybe the documents and proposals and that kind of thing. If you don't tell it where to save it, it saves it in this kind of general folder called EBM 3K under Vision. But again, I would tell it where to save it. If you've got a folder on your hard drive or a folder on your network drive, that would be the place to save it. But you tell it where to save it here.
One more here. After gathering the job hours required for any project, how do you calculate job duration and manpower? Example project, job hours 450 hours or 600 hours or 1,000 hours. I may have misread that slightly, but
okay. So what am I looking for here? There's a place where it tells us how many days. It's right here. Okay, so we kind of have to figure backwards, and some of this is going to be, you know, somebody telling you what the duration of the job is. And if you know the duration of the job is 3 months, then you can work backwards and figure how many electricians you're going to need to have on average on the job. If you can go the other direction too, you can figure, you know, well, if I'm going to need 2 guys on the job for most of the job, and I've got this many days, we can figure out if this job's going to take, I've got roughly almost 60 hours. That's just a week and a half to do this little job if I've got 2 guys out there. So you can go either direction. On a large job, they're probably going to have a fairly specific schedule for the length of the job, and you can pretty much figure as electrical contractor, you're going to be on the job from beginning to end. But of course, there's places where you're going to be more labor intensive than others. Doing all the lighting is going to be high manpower. Doing all the branch rough-in is going to be very high manpower. So it's going to have to be kind of a, you know, it's going to be a moving target as to how you schedule your manpower. The program's going to give you help though. Let me just go back real quickly to the job extension. So my job extension tells me how many hours I've got figured for above ground feeder raceway. And this little job, I've got 50 hours. That's a pretty, you know, succinct part of the job. Down here a little bit further, we've got a category for, these are categories that are automatically generated by the program. You don't have to tell it to do this. A little bit further down, there's a category, or a little bit further up, sorry, I went the wrong direction. There's a category just for feeder wire. So I've got another 55 hours just to pull the wire for the feeder part of the job. That's separate from the branch wire, separate from the branch conduit. So it gives you these nice little subtotals that'll not only help you plan your manpower, but they'll also give you some good budgets for job costing.
All right. Can you explain again how we can be competitive with overhead and profit on a large or small job? And can you show again how we include man hours for this is the same person, Ian. Show again how we include man hours for jobs that are going to last a year or more. Maybe those are two separate questions, really.
Well, being competitive, I guess, is a whole different topic. You know, one of the things Ron was commenting upon is if you start including too many things in your bid, you're going to price yourself out of it. If you go too far overhead and profit, this is really, I guess, where I think the art of estimating comes into play. You may or may not get some feedback on where your price is at. If you spend a lot of time on a big job like this and don't get feedback after the bid is complete, then you don't want to waste your time bidding to that contractor again. That's just not even reasonable. You know, you put 20, 30, 40 hours into a bid, they owe you the right to know what the low bidder was. If they're not playing square with you, then there's no reason to waste your time the next time it comes around with that particular customer. So that's part of it. You know, being competitive here, I guess, it gives me a little bit of concern with, you know, is it, and I know contractors have this mentality. My dad had this mentality. I've seen it in, you know, countless number of contractors, is that, you know, if somebody else can do it for this price, we can too. That's a dangerous philosophy. It really gets you in trouble sometimes. So I'm not sure your goal should be to be competitive. You certainly want to have good prices and productive labor. That item cost report, again, will give you some indication of where you want to shop around on the materials before you finalize your bid. And even once you get, if you're the winning contractor, that report again will help you start negotiating with your suppliers, because you can pinpoint the items you're really concerned with. What was the second part of that question, Derek?
Can you show me again? Sorry, give me 1 second. Oh yeah, can you show me again how we include man hours for jobs that are going to last a year or more?
Okay. It's not hours that are going to change, it's the rate. So you've got to do some kind of calculation on how much you figure rates are going to go up during that period. Now the hours are the hours, whether it takes a month to do the job or 3 years to do the job. You know, we're gonna provide manpower for whatever the period of the job is. It's the hourly rate you have to worry about when the job is going to go into a longer time period, because there inevitably will be changes in the rates. And again, it's to some extent you have to have a crystal ball. I've seen quite a bit of inflation in labor rates over the last couple of years, more so than material. I think there has been and probably will continue to be a shortage of manpower in the industry, and that tends to push up prices, tends to push up hourly rates. Some areas of the country it's gotten just cutthroat. You know, you get a good electrician can even sometimes get a bonus just to start to work for a company in areas where they're really short on manpower. So that's kind of a whole separate discussion, but in general, I would assume labor rates are going to continue to go up after we get through all this economic upheaval. I think it's going to go back right where it was, if not even busier. We're going to have a pretty strong construction economy. We've had 10 years of growth in the construction economy, pretty consistent. The only thing that hasn't grown along with it is the manpower availability. So that's going to push prices up. Any other questions?
Yes.
Tim, go ahead.
Yes. Paul's wondering if there's a class or that he can take with us or you to help him. He wants to know more about calculations on unproductive labor for these larger projects. So you want to address that, Brian?
Yeah, we can always provide one-on-one training online. we have a specific list of topics we're going to be sending out an email on here probably in the next couple of days, Derek, is that right?
Right, and I think they're on the last slide as well, but we also sell training by the hour that covers anything a customer specifically needs. So yes.
Yeah, so if you want just you can do training by the hour, or you can purchase one of these pre-defined classes. So none of these probably would cover what you want, but you can purchase an hour of training or whatever amount of training time that you need, and we'll schedule it to, it'll be a one-on-one session, and we could look at specific jobs that you have bid or are going to bid or in the process of bidding, that kind of thing, and look at how to approach that.
Yep, that's all for me right now. Other than one thing, well, someone was mentioned that they weren't able to attend the first two webinars, and how can they get access to them? So I have sent out emails to remind people about part 2 and part 3 over the last couple of weeks. In those emails are links to the previous webinar on YouTube. So we have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to, and there's also a bell next to the subscribe button that you can click that will allow you to get an email every time we post a video that's new. We don't post that many videos, so it's not like you're going to get emails every day, but it's kind of a good thing to keep track of what's going on with us and to get this kind of content sent to you so you can review it whenever it's convenient. Otherwise, there will be another email that follows that will have this recording and links to the other 2 recordings. So look for that email. Otherwise, just Google search us on YouTube, or go to YouTube and search our company name, and you'll find it.
So the people that attended, as well as the people who were registered that didn't attend, will get that email, right?
Correct, everybody.
Okay, yeah. So if you registered for the first one, you should have gotten an email even if you didn't attend it. But like Derek said, this next email will have links to the recordings on all 3. Recordings will be cleaned up a little bit. You won't have they won't be as long as the actual webinar. We try to take out a little bit of the extra stuff that's not necessary.
I have one more question. I think looks like maybe we can count this one as the last question. Otherwise, they've got to get some training with you, or wait for the next webinar, or look at our YouTube page and see what you can find. Also, if you're on our extended service plan, or you're a subscription customer of Electrical Bid Manager, questions here and there can also be sent through support. You can go to our website at visioninfosoft.com/support, or just go to our website and find support, and there's a web form there to submit, and they'll get back to you as soon as possible. Same day, usually within an hour. So this last question. If a job is estimated to last 90 days for 2 guys, it's a math problem. 90 days for 2 guys.
You can see how good I am with my calculator.
Is it safe to just calculate the hours for those 90 days plus material?
I'm not sure what the
challenges on it.
I'm not sure what the concern there is. If you have 90 hours, you still have the same concerns about 90 days. Okay.
For 2 guys.
Then for 2 guys, yeah. Again, your hours day to day, week to week will go up and down during the job. But yeah, unless there's other extenuating circumstances, I think you're gonna use the hours that are in your bid, and then it's up to you to manage it well so that they're not, spending time on the job that they're not needed. So maybe one of the things that's addressing is if it's a job where you have to pull the electricians on and off the job a lot because there's a lot of stopping and starting, and they show up for 2 hours and then they're done for the day and they've got to go to another job or have to go home or whatever. There's more lost times in those types of jobs. So if you anticipate based on experience that there's going to be a lot of, on and off, a lot of stopping and starting on the job, a lot of lost time due to that, then I think you want to include some additional hours for that. real tough one to know ahead of time, but you may again know based on experience. That's one of the problems with little jobs. You know, you're doing a little tenant improvement on a 3,000 square foot space. You know, you're going to show up for a couple of days and then another half a day, and then not going to come back for a while maybe. There's lost time and all that setup and clean up and all that. So that's again where little jobs have more. You don't get as good a productivity on a little job.
All right.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Ron and Derek, and everybody stay safe. Bye now.
All right. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
Ron. Bye.
All right, Ron. Thanks a
You too.
lot. You too.
All right.